Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ashley Barlow Company podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host. If you are a parent, a teacher, or someone who works at a school, or you're a community member, a volunteer, or a staff member at an organization that supports people with special education plans, a coach, a tutor, or even a grandparent, you're in the right place. Sit back with an ice-cold glass of lemonade, put on your walking shoes and grab some headphones, roll down the windows and cruise. Ready, set, go. Educate, advocate, collaborate.
Today, we welcome Amy Bonn to the podcast. And oh my gosh, I have to tell you guys, I don't have a ton of favorite episodes, but this episode is definitely in my top 5. Amy and I had the best conversation. She said things and believes things and practices in ways that are so similar to the way that I handle things and the way that I think. And it was just so many times that I wanted to say, yes, 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 I completely agree. Incredible conversation. I can't wait for you to listen to this one. I want to tell you a little bit about Amy before we get started. Amy is a Nebraska attorney providing legal representation to families of children with disabilities in special education matters. Amy is a summa cum laude graduate of Creighton University School of Law, where she was a member of the Board of Editors of the Creighton Law Review. She is licensed to practice in the state and federal courts in Nebraska. Amy is also a proud parent of children with developmental disabilities. She completed a 10-month traineeship in disability advocacy and leadership at the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities at the Munroe-Meyer Institute, University of Nebraska Medical Center, where her research focus was on parental advocacy and special education. I'm going to stop talking because I can't wait for you to hear Amy's and my conversation. Hi, Amy. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Ashley. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am so excited to welcome you here to the podcast. You and I speak a lot of the same language. We do very similar work, only you get to do it with the COPAA big stamp today. And so why don't you take a second and just introduce yourself, tell my audience about yourself, what you do, and what your affiliation with COPAA is.
Sure. Thanks so much. So I'm Amy Bonn, and I am an attorney representing families of children with disabilities in special education matters. And I'm also a consulting attorney with COPAA. I'm also a parent of children with developmental disabilities. So I came to special education advocacy first as a parent. I had practiced in a different area of the law many years before. And then I learned about this area of the law, became very passionate about it. And then it was about 4 years ago, I was fortunate enough to start working as a consulting attorney with COPAA under Celine Almazan, our wonderful legal director. And so I assist COPAA, which is, of course, for probably a lot of your listeners are familiar with COPAA, but for those of you that aren't, the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, we're a national nonprofit peer-to-peer organization. Our members are parents of children with disabilities, professional advocates, attorneys, and we are working to protect and enforce the legal and civil rights of children with disabilities and their families. So I do a lot of work with assisting with trainings. I work with with Celine. She teaches every year a 12-week special education law online training course. I teach some of the special education advocacy training classes. That's a year-long class for non-attorney advocates. And I do work with the amicus committee. So the COPAA authors a number of amicus briefs for mostly cases that have gone up to the Federal Circuit Courts of Appeals that will have a real impact on many children with disabilities and their families. And so it's wonderful. It's great to have come into an area of the law that I'm so passionate about. And that's so personal for me as a parent.
Yeah, I always say that too. The year before my son that had Down syndrome was born, at the Thanksgiving table, I told people I was thankful for the Pillsbury dough that doesn't have the seams, like crescent rolls without the triangles cut into it, because I could wrap my brie. And when I got Jack, I was like, oh, this is why I care so much.
Yeah.
To talk about crescent rolls anymore.
Exactly. Yes, it's and I was telling you before the podcast started that I'm a military spouse. My husband is active duty in the Air Force. He's stationed here. We're here in right outside of Omaha, Nebraska. He's at Offutt Air Force Base, and that poses its own series of challenges to families too. And so I'm particularly very much interested in advocating for families of military connected children because it's just that additional layer. And again, another reason that I feel so fortunate to have found an area that I love because, it's tough to practice law as a military spouse because you're moving a lot as we did. And so, but yeah, so that's a whole area of challenge that families face. And so I love to work with military families too.
I have done a couple of podcasts on military families and interviewed a few people, and I've done a lot of work in that space myself personally as well. And I think even just the outreach of people empathizing with families that have kids with disabilities and just moving so often is one thing. Like if you move every other year, you really get one IEP cycle in a district. But empathy from the rest of the country would be great. But then we need so many more people to step in to effect change, both in DoD schools and in the military, for those of you that are choosing to use your public and private schools in your new areas. And then allowing you all to move to different places or to stay stateside a little bit longer or to, there's so many different factors. And yeah, that's really important work that you're doing.
Thanks. Well, yeah, no, and it is important. And I represent a lot of families living near a military base. I represent a lot of families in my practice in Nebraska, but also COPAA, it works to do a lot of trainings too, to really speak for military families. And we have military family memberships to really work on, like you said, that empathy is a really crucial component of it because sometimes you do feel alone, as you're moving to a new place. We very rarely have extended family where we're going. And we're meeting a new team. We're trying to, start from scratch. And so having people that understand is great. And that's so important. But then also, okay, here are the tools. Here are your rights. Make sure that you're aware of this regulation. If you're moving in the middle of the school year, whatever it might be, is really, it's important.
Huge. Absolutely huge. Yes, I completely agree. So today we're going to talk about my favorite topic, advocacy. And I love that so we're kind of founding this discussion. Sorry, I thought I was out of everything and we just got some kind of alert. Weather updates. So I love that you are doing this with some alliteration. So we're going to talk about 3 P words that can help you to improve your advocacy. You want to give us a little preview? What was our topic paragraph on the 3 Ps, Amy?
Sure. So this is, and again, I was telling you that I had a series of light bulb moments as a mom, because again, I didn't know I knew just enough about SPED law to be dangerous, like back when I started my own journey as a parent advocating for my kids. But it was over the years that I learned more and more, and of course, then started practicing in this area. But the biggies that I have learned really over the years was that first P is present levels. So many of you are familiar with the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. That is so huge as the basis for the foundation for building an IEP. So that's present levels of the first P. The second P is progress. Probably a lot of your listeners are familiar with the Andrew F. Supreme Court case from 2017 that provided us with a much better standard for ensuring that our children are receiving a free, appropriate public education. Is that appropriate progress? And so then the third P is prior written notice. And that's for, yes, a lot of times we think, okay, the district has to provide us notice of changes or what they're refusing, but really learning. And again, I first learned it as a parent and then, using it as an attorney for my clients is figuring out how to use that to advocate. So it's the present levels, progress, prior written notice. So those are the 3 Ps that I have, that I like to pass on to clients and other families too.
So this is what I'm going to say about that. So the first one is to be yes, this is why Ashley has so many and psych sign. We have to know about those present levels. That's the foundation of the IEP. Okay. So people are going to be yes. The second part, they're going to be oh God, I have to understand progress and I have to do something with it. And it would be helpful if I took progress down. So stick with us. I will tell you, I personally am most excited to hear what Amy has to say about prior written notice, because I might be one of those people that is like, yeah, they have to put it in writing. If they don't, then okay. So I'm really excited to hear how you apply that to advocacy. Okay, let's get started. I couldn't agree with you anymore that we can gain so much information and we can really strengthen an IEP if we dive into those present levels and if the team understands them and knows what to do with them. So let's dive into those present level performance a little bit more.
Sure. So it was such a, like I was saying, a light bulb moment for me when I was realizing the importance of data-driven IEP meetings. And that's something that experienced advocates, experienced attorneys are aware of, and experienced parents are aware of. But when it's your first rodeo, so to speak, you go in and you're thinking, okay, I think we need more time with a speech therapist, or we want a goal in writing, or whatever, we need an FBA, functional behavior assessment, whatever the case may be. And so we maybe have our asks, our very general asks, but it's so important to come in with data, whether it's in the form of standardized testing scores, grades, whether it's work samples, whatever the case may be, to really say, this is where my child is currently. And these are the disability related educational deficits. And how are we going to speak to these needs in the IEP so that we can have that baseline and then we can look and say, okay, how much progress is appropriate over the course of the IEP year? And so one of the helpful things, a silver lining to obviously the terrible difficulties with COVID was so many of us as parents were at home with our kids getting more of a view of what's going on. I mean, not all of us had the luxury of being there and seeing their child try to zoom into IEP meeting, to classes. We know it was very difficult. But we could start getting a sense of, oh, I can be a source of data as well. So yes, we're relying on the district, the school, and our child's teacher to tell us what's going on. But we can certainly provide information as well. I know a lot of times with everything being like Google Classroom, everything is submitted online. It's great, but also we don't always have the view as parents of, hey, what's my kid's grades? How is their essay writing? What's happening? And so learning to really collect that and be able to show that, whether it could be emails from teachers saying there's behaviors or we're slipping on turning work in, and then bringing paper in hand to the IEP meeting or share screen in the Zoom IEP meeting is so crucial. Otherwise, it's just mushy. We've all probably, as parents at one time or other, especially in the beginning, have probably experienced going in. We talk generally about our child's needs. We talk generally about some stuff that's going to happen and some goals, but it's just not specific. And it's not specifically, we know it's supposed to be individualized and tailored, but it's getting that granular data and coming in with it and saying, here it is. Let's build the IEP off of this. One other quick note, this is one thing I learned from COPAA trainings during the pandemic was even if your child is struggling with reading, for example, with decoding, video them on your phone reading. So really, as that can be data that you bring to the table to say, here's where the struggle is occurring. And so that can just, I find when I'm representing clients, we spend a lot of time at the IEP table on the present levels, a long time. Because then, really going through, making sure it's discussed, making sure it's documented, and then that lays the groundwork to really put together all the other pieces, the goals and services and placement.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you anymore. And I think like it's intimidating to parents to set up graphs and charts and that kind of thing. But I agree with you entirely. Journal entries or little video snippets or whatever. And if you take all of that raw data and you start to assimilate it into patterns, it becomes less intimidating. And I find that meetings are so much more efficient because if you don't start thinking about your child's present levels and their performance, their progress, and what they're doing until you're at an IEP table and somebody has read a statement to you, well, then all of the words have to come out because you're literally thinking out loud. Whereas if you're working with your child or observing your child working with somebody else, it could be a tutor or a therapist or the next door neighbor in the soccer cage, but you're watching those things happen and you're putting things down, then you can do something objective with it. We don't want as much of that subjective gut feeling. We want more objective information, right, Amy? Because that's what we can do something with that objective information once we have it documented in the present levels, don't you think?
Yes, no, absolutely. And I loved how you say, that subjective, those gut feelings. And so much of that leads to why the IEP experience can be so emotionally, upsetting for a lot of families because they're like, my child needs this and we need, we want this. And when we're able to make it about objective data and facts, and this is the number of times X has occurred, it's less about emotions and feeling their child has been wronged or frustrations with the other team members. And it's about it's about the facts. It's about the data. It's about, well, the regulations say this and this is what it is. And honestly, once we're trained up as, to advocate, whether it's for ourselves, our own kids, or for our clients, it's less emotional. It's just the facts. And it's very empowering to think. And more importantly, it results in better goals and progress for our kids, which is of course what everybody wants at the IEP table.
Yeah, because we need to take their present levels, and we scoop up the needs that we're going to identify to work on. We all have a billion needs, right?
Right.
But I just identified one myself. I need to sit still.
Me too.
I go off camera when I'm propping up, and I come. But we need to identify the needs that we're going to work on then, and those are the needs that we're going to track progress with those goals. That's really the whole purpose of the goals, to get the specially designed instruction and then to track the progress. But we also have to capitalize on the strengths. And so those present levels have to have objective and gut feeling strength, right? Like, I love it when present levels say, he really has a sense of belonging when he can be a helper. I'm like, yes, that is everybody's gut feeling. I don't know that we can track sense of belonging. I'm sure some psychologists or sociologists can help us do that, but I've never seen an IEP team do that. But if we're trying to cultivate a sense of belonging in a case that has like a strong inclusion undertone to it, then why not put that in present levels? Because that's going to influence what's happening down in the LRE section so significantly when we get there. And it builds as it goes too, right? So like the strength-based portion of that, I'm not one of those like catchy phrase people like strength-based IEP. I don't know what that means. But I do know that if we put strengths in there, objective, like strong visual profile, relatively good phonological processing, whatever it is, that we can capitalize on those things.
And that is so hugely important, especially I was just thinking going back to, military connected children, because if we have that built in that says this works for this child, when this child is provided with the opportunity to help or to really make a connection with peers or with the teacher, whatever it might be, that's where we really see progress happen. This is a strength for them because for kids that are not going to, they're going to be moving a lot. I mean, I've known families that have stayed one place, in one duty station for 1 year and they moved on. So having that there is really important to say. And like you said, so we can go on and say for LRE, for least restrictive environment purposes, oh yeah, this isn't a situation where we just need to move this child into a more restrictive placement. We can look and say, yeah, we want to look at what supplementary supports and services formally, let's look at our list. But also once you get to know the child, like you said, strengths, this is what works. This can make all the difference to keep them, in the gen ed environment or whatever, whatever classroom we're working to keep them in. And also on that, it's baseline data is so crucial. And that's kind of what goes into when we say, present levels. That's really kind of the idea of it is what's the baseline? And honestly, I very rarely have families come to me in my practice, when they know something's wrong, they're unhappy with the progress, they're unhappy with a variety of things. And very rarely is there, when I go through all the paperwork, are there clear baselines for the goals? And so of course, everything's just going to be mushy. Are we tracking it? Are we seeing? And so it's just the foundation of the entire document, of the entire process. I've been in a meeting or two where, we're spending a long time in the present levels and I can tell the staff members, the teachers are, getting a little bit antsy. And I'm like, I promise you that the whole IP is not going to take hours, it's not going to take all day. We're front loading this. because once we have this really thoroughly sketched out, other things are going to fall into place when we see, oh, here's the need, or here's a strength, and we're going to build on that. It's the roadmap.
I agree entirely. Okay, so this section is going to be longer than the other one. We'll just warn people because I have something to say about baselines too.
Yeah.
Like, see how this turns into a conversation?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
it is so exciting.
I know
about
those too.
something.
Yeah.
We really do speak the same language. I can't
Definitely.
think when you get the draft IEP, like I'm like, thank you for writing the IEP draft because that's not something I do.
Mhm.
I am a mom in this case, or I am an attorney that reads these things all day, but I don't know one thing about those drop down menus. I can't draft a draft IEP. I can look at yours and I can review what you've got and I can think outside the document and think about what I would like to add, but I can't draft it. So I don't mind that that's a little predeterminative, if that's a word. And I don't think the world should, right? Like that's just the way the system works. However, I don't like it when it's got baseline data only for their proposed goal, because it is a proposed goal. What if the team has a discussion and says, we want to work on this gross motor skill, or we want to work on this regulation strategy? Okay, well, then we need a goal to track the regulation strategy. So I was just in an IEP meeting last week where they took best baseline data. They just got real nitty gritty with this kid and they did like an Orton Gillingham. She's on, I think this team uses Leonard Bell, although I think I said that at their meeting and they were like, no, we use Wilson or something, but whatever. They like went in and they did like a 20-minute curricular assessment to see where the kid was in phonemes, like phoneme decoding, and then where the kid was on phonological processing in their curricular thing. And it was just this list. It was like maybe a quarter of a page long on data. And from that data, it was like, okay, this is clear. We're really good at these things. And this is a 25%. We're going to work on TH. We're going to work on X. We're going to work on this. These are the sounds we need to learn how to read. And then the same thing on math. And I was like, Eureka. You never see a list in that baseline data of like, here's stuff that we're good at and we need to master still. And we're going to pull from that list. All they ever say is like, this is what we think she needs to master. And I'm like, well, cool. Can we look at 8 other 5th grade skills?
Mhm.
I loved it. I was so excited. I mean, I've seen that before, but this one was like, Eureka. I'm so excited. So I think, like, Amy, how can parents, here's the question then, how can parents get baseline data that gives them a better sense of like where they actually are instead of just like, we're going to work on
Right.
pH or whatever?
So, and I really appreciate that you're giving that specific example with a child who was needing to build reading skills. One of the really instructive moments I was working with a family. They had a private tutor who I believe they were an Orton Gillingham literacy tutor. And she had basically kind of present levels for the child in their tutoring, where she went through and exactly like you said, with the letter combinations, and here's what the multisyllabic words, and here's where we are. And so we went in with the team and we built very specific goals with objectives saying this is where the child is able to do, 6 out of 10 on how many trials of this. And then that a lot of times families are wanting specific methodologies and the team is saying, well, no, we'll decide that. And, there's a battle over that. But there's a real trick there. If we come in with that data and then, really putting that with specific baselines and the goals, we can kind of, I don't want to use the word force, but we can encourage the use of specific methodologies by having to teach to that and then track that data and provide it in the periodic progress reports. So that is what, so, it's trickier if we have, if we don't have a reading tutor who can say, oh, here's where the levels are. So it can be honestly things like I'd have had families who say, my child really struggles with math. And I know that they're not doing well. Maybe they have a learning disability in math, or maybe they have another disability, but it affects their ability to do things. And we don't know where the gap in skills lies. So sometimes that's where I'll say, okay, can we create our own data? Can you, if you're not getting worksheets home, can you work with your child to do a little bit at home where we can see, look, this is the breakdown. They're not able to subtract 3-digit numbers, whatever it is. They're not solid on their multiplication tables, whatever it is. And then I encourage families, I know in Nebraska, and I assume other states have this, if I go to my Department of Education main page and Google content area standards.
Yeah.
And so I encourage everyone to do that because that lists, here's the grade level, here's the subject area, and then you can get very specific skills like that, decimals and fractions, things like that. So then I encourage families to build goals around those very, very specific skills, especially once we're determining through asking for data or for creating our own to say, this is where the deficit is. We need a goal specifically that speaks to decimals because that's where everything is maybe falling apart. Another thing, like you were saying, well, how do we get the data? Honestly, a lot of times when I'm working with clients, I always say it's going to be at least 2 meetings. It's going to be at least 2 IEP meetings because often we go and there's no data baselines to be found. The teachers, and I'm not to, and not to be overly critical because the teachers are busy. They don't have, granular everything for everyone. And so a lot of times we'll say, hey, can we get this? Can you get us the map report, the standardized test, the more granular level of the skills, not just telling us what the overall percentage was? Can we see, maybe when the resource teacher is working with the child, can we get them to have them work with him and see, here's where it breaks down on reading comprehension questions or whatever. And then we can reconvene and really build meaningful goals that are not just 80% proficiency in math, right? Because where's the, we don't know where the flaws are.
You're like, okay, well, there's 80 skills that you learn. Check out this chart. And then you
exactly
scroll. I literally folded one. I wrote it one time like a scroll, and I was like, look at 4th grade math.
Right. And it's just, we got to know where's the skill deficit. And maybe it's the child's in 4th grade math, but there's a 2nd grade skill that they never mastered. And that's where everything is kind of going off the rails a little bit. So that can be crucial. And then for an example too, when it comes to behaviors, if your child is demonstrating, challenging behaviors in the classroom, and it can be such a challenge because we know, when we go pick up our child in the afternoon from school, or we get called to come pick up our child early, and the teacher tells us that something's going on. Okay, well, how is that date? How do I bring that to the team to say, hey, it sounds like X, Y, or Z is happening? So I encourage families a lot to, when you get home, write a polite email. Doesn't need to be emotional. It's beneficial if it's not, to say, thank you for telling me this afternoon that my son, ran out of the classroom, or whatever it was. Thank you for telling, and then you're just laying that, you're kind of collecting that data. Also go through, and I know it's hard as families are working, they have children with disabilities. It is work, it's time, but it becomes more second nature. I go through, collect all those emails where the teacher said, oh, this happened, because it can help tracking. We know that professionals can do functional behavior assessments, but we can be contributing too, to say, you know what, I'm noticing this is happening right before lunch. I'm noticing that I get the emails, or the teacher tells me at the drop off that this is what the challenge is. When I was having issues with my own child with some elopement many years ago, the school knew it was a concern. I was raising the concern, but I went through, and so again, it's one thing to say elopement is a concern in the present levels, but I went through, I pulled the emails, I pulled the voicemails that they had called and told me about it. So I went through and maybe if I wasn't on the ball at the time, I can estimate it was approximately this date. Here's when I learned what happened, so that there is a number to it. My child has left the classroom. My child has left the building X number of times. And what that does is, that I know about.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that screams out for, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah.
It's easy to gloss over. It's easy for a team. And again, not to be overly critical, but it's easy for human beings. We're all busy to gloss over something that says parents concerned about elopement. The parents concerned about reading. But if we come through and say,
I went through and counted.
Yeah. And put a number to it. Put a number to it.
So like, if you just, it's a lot of negative energy, and I'm like an energy, I'm pretty crunchy. I don't look crunchy because of the J. Crew, but I'm crunchy. So what you got to do is you spend this negative energy writing down a couple notes in your notebook, and then write 3 things for which you're grateful, and it will get you back on track. But if you just start writing shit down, like whatever happens, write it down. the trends will start to identify themselves. So for a month or 2 months, or heck, it might be 3 years, you're not going to really know where you're being railroaded, or where you're being railroaded literally just means taken on a track. There's not a whole lot of negative connotation there, people. Where you're being directed, or what is happening to your child in any situation, but the trends will show themselves. And, I think everybody's had friends that have gotten divorced, and that this is what people that are divorced do. And, you feel like, oh, I'm documenting everything. I hope my kids never see this, and don't let them see it. But eventually it's going to show that the child has anxiety when this happens, or this particular provider is not right, or it could be something regarding your former spouse. Whatever it is, the trends start to emerge. And then you can go back and look at the data. And then, once the trends emerge, it's maybe easier to do in a spreadsheet or with videos or something else. So, yeah, I agree with you entirely. And Amy, I think this baseline thing leads well into the next P, which is progress, because we really kind of are taking progress data and putting it into the present levels. So let's talk about your big epiphany with progress monitoring.
Yes.
Progress.
Progress. Yes. So appropriate progress. And this really, this honestly it's kind of was backwards, because we knew about Andrew F., right? We knew in 2017, the U.S. Supreme Court said appropriate progress. That's what kids have a right to. Kids with IEPs have a right to, is an IEP that's reasonably calculated to enable them to make appropriate progress. And so it's really it was kind of cart before the horse, because then it's where the light bulb goes and says, oh, that's why the present levels are so important, is how are we moving with that? But it is, Andrew F. gave us a gift, the 2017 CAT case, because it's a good standard for our kids. But it gives us a challenge also. That means that we have to be looking. We have to be counting the data. And this is where I was saying, once we talked, even just now, us talking through the present levels, these other components kind of are much quicker to address, because that's where we look and we say, okay, I'm going to look back through the progress reports. What I like to do is I take screenshots of when I'm working on it with a family, I go back and I say, okay, give me all the IEPs, give me all of the quarterly progress reports. It's here we do quarterly, but you could, periodic progress reports. And I list them, I put them all next to each other. So here, second grade, here was the reading, here's the progress reports for that. Third grade, here was the reading goal, here were the progress reports. You can really start, and then I literally, sometimes I'll make copies of that and share with the team to show, look, it's not, we're going backwards, we're not making progress, or gee, there's not a lot of data in the progress reports. And that's where, by bringing that in and showing that to the team, again, we're not shaming anybody. We're saying, what's really going to help team is, how do we know that this child is making appropriate progress if we don't even know how much progress they're making, or if they are making any progress at all? And so, because it's not just, gee, we hope this child doesn't regress, but we don't want them to stagnate either. So honestly, once we've thought about the baselines, combing through and saying, here's where we are. We're not making a sufficient progress, and here's the proof of it. What needs to change? We're not going to drop the goal. Well, I mean, if it's an inappropriate goal, sure, but assuming it's important, we're not going to drop it. We're not going to bring the goal level down if we really truly think it was an appropriate, goal, aspiration there. But think, how do we need to tweak that specially designed instruction? Different methodology, different delivery of instruction. What's, more service minutes? What is it that we need to do? And so that can be a powerful thing, and trying to get us out of that trap of 80%. Like a lot of goals are like 80% in this area. We'll have 80% accuracy in writing, 80% accuracy in math. And it's like, well, let's go back through and really see what does that mean? Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You get 80% in February. Like, you live where February is terrible. I live where February is terrible. I'm basically in Cincinnati. I'm in Kentucky. But nobody's going to get to 80% in February. And then we only have 2 more months plus field trips where we can actually show mastery. So what's 80% mean? Or 3 out of 4? Is anybody actually that consistent? And does that mean that you've got it mastered? What is 2 out of 5 mastery?
Right.
Look at a kid that also thinks they're funny, so they're going to answer wrong. We have to look at so many factors. I couldn't agree with you anymore. I want to backtrack though, because I want to know. Okay. So here's what I pictured that you said when you were tracking progress. Cause I started doing this after Andrew F2.
Yeah.
I took third grade goals, fourth grade goals, fifth grade goals. I started doing this for almost every client. I put mine in an Excel spreadsheet, but when you were talking, I pictured my kitchen island with like, cut them all out.
Yep.
And then I divide them out by category, like reading comprehension, or it might be self-help, but it might be like self-help dash toileting. Because what I started to notice, so there was a big thing in Indramath, like part of the narrative was they would repeat goals. So he was working on stringing beads for like, do you remember how many years, Amy? Like,
I don't off the top of my head, but right. Yeah.
yeah, I remember Jack Robinson, the attorney that represented the family, talking about that. And like, that's what lies in my head when I do this. It was like last year he could string 4 beads, and third grade he can only string 5 beads. And it's like, great. What am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
So I do it by category, and I actually do stoplights. So green if you've made progress, red if you've regressed, and yellow if it's like, okay. But what I started noticing was that one goal will get recycled. Like filling time, that's a big one. Kids, listen, just don't care. They don't care what time it is. It's intangible. I represent a lot of kids with Down syndrome. 9 out of 10 of them, in my practice at least, don't care what time it is and don't care what time anything happens. It's cycling. This is just untouchable. But I'm like, if you weren't making progress in first grade and you didn't amend the teaching and you weren't making progress in second to the point that you abandoned it, why are you adding back in and fifth without any context for why it's happening? And I think that's really powerful. I call this goal tracking. Can you dive a little bit further into how you do it? Because I don't know that it's super common practice, and I find it super powerful.
Yeah, I do. And it sounds like we do it slightly differently because it sounds like you were saying, well, here's this, I'm going to put all the second grade goals together in the third. Or is that because what I'll do is I'll take it like, what was the reading goal? And I'll put reading all together. Like I'll literally do the screenshots where we can see. And then I'll kind of tuck those the quarterly progress reports in. I'm not sure if that's how you do it or if, but, and also you can see where a certain goal that was important disappears. So yes, some goals were just like, hey, this is not important this is not meaningful goal for the child or for the family. But but here's where really being on top of all the other stuff too, all of the other paperwork, the special education evaluations, I tend to, and we call them MDTs here, and multidisciplinary team evaluations. So I tend to find a lot of teams view those as like a gatekeeping, like, yes, the child's eligible. We don't really need this eval.
Right.
But I like it is as a lawyer working for other families, I find it always has nuggets that you can use because the most powerful persuasive points, the most powerful data and evidence that we can bring in is from the language from the team themselves. So if they have said it's very important that the child, maybe it's a child with autism who has very limited verbal skills, is mostly nonverbal, and they're saying we need to, it's very important that this child be able to express and communicate their wants and needs, but there's no goal for it. That's huge. And yeah, or there was a goal and we didn't make progress and then we dropped the goal. And I see that. And it's
There's
that
1,000 ways to express your wants and needs.
I know.
Creatively, like that's why you have benchmarks.
Right. Yes, exactly.
It's goal, and then you can say like, first we're going to gesticulate, and then we're going to use AAC, then or like we're going to use a whole communication system, and then maybe we can get towards expressive language, then we can use 2-step directions, like
yes,
a 2-step direction.
Exactly. And then being able, when you have it very clearly expressed as, here's the baseline data, here's the present levels for all these things, and here's where we are. And okay, and don't shy away, ask the team for quarterly goals. We typically think of yearly goals, but there's nothing in the IDEA that says you can't have quarterly that says by the first quarter, we'll be able to do this. Then by the second quarter. And I find that is so helpful for families to get more of a glimpse into, oh my gosh, another year's gone by and we're at 80% of something wishy, I don't know. And so especially with something like this, like communicating when a child maybe has very limited verbal skills or partially, somewhat limited verbal skills, is I will really ask the team to take data on all of the methods of communication. So if the child is pointing to a really low tech, maybe there's just a board with some pictures on it, that they are being able to express what are the, and we'll say, what are the three, that they need a bathroom break, they need just a brain break, that they need a snack, whatever it is, or whatever it is, that they point to the low tech device and they're able to tell us X number, 4 times out of 5 on 3 different days. But then also, or they use their AC device. They have an assistive tech, communication device that we're using that. How many times are they doing it with that? How many times are they verbalizing it for children that can do somewhat? And what I get pushback on that when I ask for that, because they say, well, we don't want to keep the child from speaking in one way or the other. Like, no one's asking to to duct tape a child and say, no, you can't say, what you can. What we're asking for is the data being taken, because that way we can see, oh, this child really does prefer, there's a real untapped opportunity for verbal request, or the AC device. So often I'll hear maybe an assistive tech device would really be helpful and appropriate, but they're saying, well, the child doesn't, like, they threw it, they got frustrated, they threw it, or they just don't like it. So have a goal to have them carry it around, like that they'll have it X% of the day to X number of transitions. They'll bring the tap, the device, and then the data is on it, because so often behaviors can be preempted. The child is getting what they need if they can communicate those things. So having it's just everything in the world is getting the data on it. And that's it. Then things fall into place once we really get a sense of what's going on. Yeah.
And again, this comes back to what we were saying in present levels. Like, this is why I think this is so important. And you're right. The chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
But when we can take this data ourselves, and when we can put this into numbers or put this into objective information, we worked on this goal, we didn't make progress. What are we going to do to fix it? It's so much more concise.
Yep.
And it makes our meetings so much more effective, and it gives parents that voice. We are leveling the playing field if we start to talk with data, if we start to talk objectively, as opposed to I think your example was, I'd like to work on toileting.
Right.
That's not objective information. Of course, that's something you can say at the meeting as well.
Right.
I love it. Okay. You and I could go on forever. I was just thinking what we need is tequila.
It just would be great. Not too early. 9:49 a.m.
But we need margaritas.
Yes, exactly.
Margaritas, and where are we going? Irvine? Margaritas in LA.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Oh, for sure. Yes. The COPAA conference. Yes, in March, for sure.
I'm warning you that I'm probably not going to be there a lot at all, because I really, really love dessert. So I'm probably going to be
my gosh,
down in Huntington Beach a lot.
That's so amazing. I have to say, so I am an indoorsy person. So you will never catch me. You will never catch me surfing or anything to.
Oh man, you can probably tell by looking at me that I am not an indoorsy person. I'm staring. You probably have seen me stare out the window. I don't have my door open, and I'm going crazy because the sun's out. It was supposed to rain, and I'm like, but the door opens.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I like gray days. I don't know what it is with me. I like gloomy gray days, being at home, reading about SPED law.
I like gray days. I'm born on a rainy day. I think that's why I do. But I like rainy days because I like to get shit done, and they're productive.
Yes. Yep.
I'm productive today, like I told you, because the cleaning lady's coming, and there's nothing like an incentive to get organized and clean up all your
right. Having a deadline of this has to happen now. Yeah.
It does. Yes, exactly. Okay, the moment I have been waiting for. How can we improve our advocacy by talking about prior written notice?
Yes. And so I love that. I love your enthusiasm. You're probably the first person who's really excited about prior written notice. So that's great. I appreciate it.
Tell me, fill me up with information.
All right. So we know that districts have to provide prior written notice whenever they are proposing to make a change, or whenever they are refusing a change, whether it's a child identification, evaluation, provision of FAPE, replacement, all that stuff. So a lot of times we view it as paperwork. I honestly think a lot of times school professionals think of it as, okay, paperwork, right? We don't necessarily understand what the P in prior means, but we know, okay, it's before the action happens or before the refusal happens. So what can be very helpful is for parents to actually make use of this with advocacy and kind of laying a paper trail. I having listened to your podcast, Ashley, I know that you're a fan of Pete Wright, and I believe you've been to at least one of his trainings. I have too. I made a pilgrimage down to Kansas City a number of years ago. That was when he was coming near my area. And I still remember one of the things that he said that really stood out to me was that he was telling the audience was the best way to avoid going to due process, dispute resolution, is to, in your mind, pretend that one day you will go to dispute resolution. Because then you are laying the paper trail. By using all this data, doing all this stuff we've been talking about this last hour, we are hopefully persuading the team to put together a really great, appropriate IEP that enables the child to make progress. But we are also at the same time laying the paper trail for if things don't go the way that we are wanting it to, and the child is not provided with an appropriate public education, so that if one day we are before a hearing officer, then we can look and see the chain of events here, right? So one thing that I have found is, so part of the reason why I became a SPED attorney was I still remember my very first IEP meeting for my kids, one of my kids. And I had done a little bit of reading. Like I said, I'd been to law school many years before, didn't really know anything about IEPs. And I had done some reading. I came in and they were telling me, denying certain things. And I knew just enough to know that it wasn't right, that their reasoning wasn't right. But I didn't know enough yet to articulate why. Yep. Because we know, again, with PWNs, it's not just here we're denying something or we're going to change something, but they also have to say why. What's the data they're basing it on? Why are they doing this? So I really learned the value of explain why you said this, and then ask them a little bit more about it. Really let it linger in the air. I don't typically record IEP meetings. I just don't like the vibe. Yeah. But by drawing attention to it, saying, explain that, or I'll type it or write it and say, did I get that right? You said that we can't have the para because. Yeah. Did I get that right? Am I understanding that? Okay. And then, you can say, can you please put that reasoning in the prior written notice? Sometimes things like that, even just shining a light on it, can get the team to be like, that's probably not right. It can be kind of persuasive in the moment, right? Now, that might not mean that they're like, oh yeah, you got us. We're going to give you everything you're asking for, right? But it really can get them to realize this reasoning isn't kosher, right? It's not quite right. What do we need to rethink this or to propose it a certain way? Yeah. Shining that light on it, saying, okay, well, I want that in the prior written notice. Explain to me why you're doing this. Do I have this right? Can be a good advocacy tool, because then if we see, let's say we get the PWN, and then let's see it says something different, right? They've kind of had some time to think, you know what, we knew we weren't going to give the para. We knew we weren't going to give the whatever it was, the more time with the speech teacher, the speech pathologist. And we gave a weird reason that wasn't really right. And so now we're going to do something that we know what was right.
Little dog.
No, so
do you send them out after? Do you get yours after the meeting? And
yeah,
in Ohio, where I am mostly, I'm not licensed in Ohio anymore. It's too much. But where I normally am the most often they read them out loud, and then you get it before you leave.
Oh, yeah. That's a good practice. I think absolutely wherever you are, that's typically not what I see here, but I think that's something we can ask for. There's, you know what I mean? It's part of the process. Because I always come back to some of these, every time I go back through the regs, the special education regulations, I'm always finding things that I've seen before, but weren't meaningful because that wasn't relevant for a particular client, particular case. So even the things like the IEP is developed in a meeting, right? Which is, yeah, we know that. But it can be powerful then if there's things being put in that were not really, if they're saying, well, we'll write it up later. We'll put these goals in. And then you're like, that's quite what we said. And it wasn't projected up on the wall. Yeah. Right. And so that can be useful for maybe a state complaint. But anyway, I've been in the situation too, even as a parent. Well, I will email back very politely, not emotionally. During our IEP meeting, I requested X. The school declined, and you said that the reason was Y. And I asked you again, I took it down. I said, do I have that correct? That the reason my child can't have this is because of this. And you confirmed. But in the prior written notice, it says this other reason. Can you please update? Right. So what you're doing, and whether they actually update the prior written notice or not, you have laid the paper trail so that if you, like Pete Wright told us, if we ever are before a third, a neutral hearing officer, that we see, okay, here's what's being requested and here's what's being denied. But beyond that specifically, you want to have that narrative in the back of your mind. We've done it. We're collecting our data, our prior, our present level stuff, all of that information. We look over time. We're able to track progress. Our second P. Okay, is it appropriate based on all the unique things about the child? And we're going through. If we're saying it's a deprivation of FAPE, and we also have clear tracking. The family asked for X, and they said it was because of this, and they provided samples. They needed an OT. They needed OT because of the handwriting, and they provided the data, and the district said no. Right. And then 6 months later, there was another AP, and the parents again said, here's the samples of the handwriting, and we need OT, or we need a voice to text or something. And this is what we need. And the school says no. Then we document that again in the prior written notice. That lays a very clear paper trail to hopefully show under Andrew F., right, or standard of appropriate progress, that the family, the family should not have to request specific things for their child to get FAPE, but it's helpful for that narrative if they do. And then you can kind of look through and say, oh yeah, this is what we can see, the denial of FAPE. We can see the need. We can see that progress is not being made, that the parents are saying, here's the need, here's what we want, and it's not happening. And so that can be effective. But honestly, just in the moment during the IEP meeting, it's great to say, do I have that right? That the reason we don't do this is because of this, because I'm going to ask you to put that in a prior written notice. Sometimes it can get people to, wait a minute, let's do the tack.
It's called mirroring. And
Yeah. Yes.
I hate it when people do it to me too. I'm like, don't hear me. I'm going to shut up right now. But I know they give me every day.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So when you presented on these 3 Ps at COPAA, you called it thinking like a lawyer.
Mhm.
And what I loved is that stuff I do that I don't even realize I do because I'm a lawyer.
Yep.
This is what I love about COPAA, you guys. Like this, here comes the COPAA commercial. Like, so can I say like I learned something major from your last 4 minutes of talking? No, like it's all stuff I do. But does it help me think about my cases differently? And can I now feel like I can call Amy and be like, Amy, guess what happened? I need to like tease this out with you. Yes. And so even if you feel like you are a beginner level advocate, COPAA is the place for you. The training that Amy talked about, by the way, Amy, I thought we should see special education advocate training. I think it's hard to find on the COPAA website. So I just always Google COPAA seat if I'm trying to. So SEAT is what you're looking for. Some seat is great for you. Or I send a lot of people to the pre-conference, the advocacy one that Mandy Favalari does, because I just think that is like chef's kiss amazing. But also, if you feel like you have been doing this a long time, like, my listeners know I'm a mom in the disability community. I'm a self-advocate. I am a former teacher, and I am an attorney that's done this for a long time now. The way that you can start to think about things differently, pick up little tips. I had like a ginormous epiphany this year at one of Melissa Waugh's sessions that I've taught to 2 SPED directors already. That is what is so great about COPAA. And then you meet new people that you can like geek out about this stuff with. And like, I just can't recommend the conference and the organization and the trainings. And one of my resolutions be better about going to like monthly things with COPAA this year. So anyway, like I'm so grateful. Oh, I have one more thing to say. On rightslaw.com, remember you guys, it's WRIGHTS law.com. You have to use the search bar, but just type in like letter to a stranger. I share it like every week. But type in letter to a stranger. That's what Amy's talking about. And I think the grace that Pete teaches when he writes, like you said this, and I said this, and you said this, and I said that, Pete will teach you to say like, I was astonished to hear the blah, 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 say blah, blah, blah. And I always tell Pete that when I write them, I feel like I've got imaginary dimples, and I'm like, like, there's a way to do it that isn't disingenuous. And every once in a while, I'm like, that sounds so condescending. But I think you're right. I mean, like, document. But if you do it with this collaborative spirit, the thing that I love, Amy, and maybe this is a good last question, because I'm sorry I kept you a little bit over time. But I have not heard one thing from you about catching them when they've made all the mistakes, or like, get ready for due process or that state complaint. Like, everything that you have said is to improve the IEP, to collaborate with the team, to get the IEP in place so that the child can benefit. And so, like, maybe you could just kind of walk us through how these strategies actually are collaborative. They place a big onus on the family, but they are actually collaborative, right?
No, absolutely. I agree with that. And it's, one thing I'm always telling my clients is you can catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Nobody wants, I mean, I get it too. Nobody wants a lawyer coming in and saying, here's how you need to do your jobs, everybody. Here's all these like procedural things that I found. Because we want to be persuasive and get the team to want to do the work that we are hoping that they're doing and to use the same tools that we are hoping that they're using. And so absolutely very much like, even saying like I was saying, if you're finding a nugget in the MDT and the eval that says something, there's a need for this, I'll, let the team know, hey, the school psychologist had this fantastic insight in the eval that they put in the report that our family really agrees with. How do we capitalize on this great thing that the school psych noticed? Really doing that because we want them to, these are the people who are actually educating our kids. And nobody wants to litigate against their child's public school. Sometimes it has to be, sometimes it needs to happen. But I think it's much better if we can get families to where the IEP is not an emotional, distressing experience, but it's a way that we work together, that we're fact-based, not emotional, not emotional. So
Yeah. And that's really the heart of it. And it's such effective stuff. I have to say that this is probably my favorite episode, like at least in the year, maybe year plus, because you and I do speak the same language. And I love for my audience to hear these things from multiple lenses and experience viewpoints. And so I'm super grateful for you and the work that you're doing and for the time that you took to share this with my audience.
thanks so much for having me, Ashley. I really love your podcast and all that you're providing for families.
Thank you. Thank you.